So what's going on, guys? DIY Dan here again, and this is another mechanical video. In this video, I'm going to be going over a thorough explanation of how to install an under-the-grill LED light bar to a 2001 Ford F-250. Now, for the most part, the concept of installing one of these under-the-grill LED light bars is going to be the same, irregardless of the manufacturer of the vehicle or the brand of the light bar. So if you are thinking about purchasing one of these style of light bars and you don't have the vehicle that I'm putting it on in this video might still help you out. Now, this is a pretty long video, guys, but it is going over electricity, and I like to be very thorough when I'm doing that. I'm also going to go over mistakes I made, so hopefully you don't make the same mistakes, and give you some helpful tips along the way. Now, I am going to have a couple extra steps as far as modifying the one I got, because I actually picked it up at a garage sale for about 20 bucks. So the brackets that were in that kit weren't made for this exact vehicle. However, I was able to modify those, make them work, and it actually came out really nice. So if you actually purchase one that's made for the vehicle you have, the process is going to be even easier than what I go over in this video. As far as wiring it in, once again, it's going to be the same for almost any vehicle or any kit that you get. One difference is that I'm going to show you is normally these are just hooked to the battery and you can turn that light switch on at any time. I did not want that because this is my daughter's vehicle and I didn't want her accidentally leaving it on, killing the battery, and then me having to go and give her a jump. So I actually wired this in on a key on power, so that wasn't even a possibility. And I'm going to show you how I did it. So let's get to it. So this truck actually still had some fog lights in underneath the grill, and I just felt it was going to be easier to remove those with the grill off of the vehicle. So this Ford has 4 screws at the top of the grill, and then there are 4 metal clips that hold the lower part of the grill to the lower support. In order to remove those 4 metal clips, I pulled the top part of the grill away from the vehicle a little bit, reached my hand in there and squeezed on those metal clips as I pulled a little bit of tension on the lower part of the grill away from the vehicle with my other hand. I removed the bolts holding the brackets that held those fog lights, and also had to remove the fog light from that bracket in order to remove them from the bumper to get them out of the way. So once again, since this wasn't actually made for this vehicle, I did have to modify a couple things in order to make it fit. Right here is the brackets that were coming with the LED light bar, and they just weren't even close. So what I ended up doing is cutting off the one set of bolt holes to shorten them up, and then I went ahead and put that light bar in with that bracket just to see where we sat after that. And I was a little too long, maybe by about a ½ inch. So then I took my oscillating tool and I cut out just a little bit of the plastic on each side underneath the bumper in order to make that fit. Then using a little die grinding bit on my drill, I kind of cleaned up those edges to give it a nice clean finish. I set the 2 modified light bracket bars in place, then assembled the light bar and tightened it down to those brackets so I could mark where I needed to drill the holes in the brackets in order to mount that light bar. I ended up using 5/16 bolts in order to hold that bracket on each side and tighten those down using lock washers in order to keep them from vibrating loose in the future. So even though I didn't do this, it is a good idea to start all your nuts and bolts and get this thing fully assembled before tightening anything down. It just usually makes the installation go a little easier. Because I had already tightened down the mounting brackets to the vehicle, it did make it a little bit more of a pain in the ass to get the bolts in the LED light to those mounting brackets, whereas if everything was loose, it probably would have been a little easier, and then I could have tightened everything down. One thing you do need to consider if you're thinking about buying one of these under-the-grill LED light bars is how much airflow you are going to block to the radiator or tranny cooler or any other cooler that might be right behind that location. So being as though mine is pretty skinny that we installed on this vehicle, and she does not haul the heavy loads that I used to haul, I didn't figure it was going to be a problem, but you do need to consider this, especially if you were considering buying one that was either a double row or basically one that covers that entire surface area under that grill. And I can almost guarantee you that the manufacturers of these lights don't care or won't tell you about that, because they just want to sell the product. And a lot of the times the manufacturers of the vehicles will put the tranny cooler right down there. So if you're not getting airflow through that area, you might be running your temperature of your tranny hotter than normal, which can cause premature failure. And this is all relative to what you use your vehicle for. If you're hauling heavy loads, it is something you need to consider more so than if it's just your daily driver around town. So right here, I'm just running the wire loom from that LED light bar up by the driver's side battery So most likely if you buy one of these kits, you're going to come with an inline fuse to protect the circuit. It's going to come with a relay to handle the high load of the light bar, and it's going to come with a switch to put inside the cab, obviously, in order to operate it. Now in my case, as I discussed earlier in this video, I am going to wire it a little differently because normally you just put this to the battery and you can operate this light at any time. I put a key on power to it so it doesn't kill the battery if it gets left on for an extended period of time. Before doing any type of electrical connections, it's always a good idea to disconnect the ground from your battery or two batteries if you have a diesel before doing any of that, so you possibly don't short something out, even though I did not do that in this video. So I don't remember whether this wiring didn't come with an inline fuse or I just decided to upgrade it at the time I did this. But right here, I'm just switching and putting an inline fuse right off the battery and then using a butt connector with heat shrink over the top of it in order to connect it to the power supply on the harness that came with that light bar. After connecting the power wire, then I went ahead and connected the ground in the same manner. Now, if you're doing a standard hookup that normally comes in these kits, that is all the wire connections you will need to do. As far as connections to the vehicle itself, the rest of the electrical connections you're going to have to make are probably just going to be plug-in pigtails into each other as far as the harness goes, from the switch that goes in the cab to the main harness on the outside of the cab. So right here you can see that the positive cable does have a rubber cover over the top of it, and it's sticking up because of that new lead that we ran to the battery. A lot of times I will just take a pair of dikes and snip out a little area so that rubber cover will sit flush and it has a little cleaner look to it when you're adding accessories like this. Right here I just found a nice place in order to mount the relay, so I'm pre-drilling a hole, then using a self-tapping screw in order to hold that relay in position. So at this point in the video, I'm just going to go over the rest of the regular installation. If you are curious on how to do that key on power so you don't end up with a possible dead battery if you leave it on, that will be after the regular installation, more towards the end of this video. So right here I just marked out where I'm going to put the rocker switch in the dash. Make sure you reach behind there with your hand and make sure there is no wiring and that you actually have room to install the rocker switch before cutting any holes. I marked it out with a pencil and then just used my oscillating tool in order to cut out the material in the dash. I always start a little bit on the small side. I can always open it up a little bigger because if I end up cutting it too big to start, then I'm screwed. I did have to open it up a couple more times as I tried the rocker switch to make sure I had a snug fit. Once I had it the right size, I went ahead and ran the wiring harness from the switch through that part of the dash and out the bottom. The switch that came with this LED light bar is a rocker switch, and it just snaps into that hole and holds itself. A lot of the light bar kits that are available today, the switch is just going to have some double-sided tape that you can pretty much stick on the dash anywhere. On the harness that goes through the cab for the switch did have a pretty big pigtail end on it, and I didn't want to have to cut that big of a hole in order to feed it from the cab to the outside firewall. So what I ended up doing is removing the wires from that harness, and I'm just going to give you an overview of how you can do that. Before removing these wires, make sure you take a picture so you know the orientation of these wires when you put it back together. So more often than not, it's pretty easy to remove the wires from these harnesses. You'll notice right here that this wire connection has a little lifted tab, and there's a spot in the molded plastic of the pigtail that you just have to take a small pick or small screwdriver or a needle, stick that pick or needle through the end of that pigtail and leverage down that little tab that's going to be on the wire. As you do that, put a little bit of light tension on that wire and pull it out. Now there are certain type of electrical pigtails that do require special tools, but this is the most common, especially for automotive aftermarket accessories. By doing this, it made it so I could cut a much smaller hole or drill a smaller hole through the firewall in order to run that harness through. Then I connected a small miscellaneous piece of wire I had by electrical taping the two together just to make it easier to run it through that hole. When feeding the wires through the firewall or under the dash, watch to make sure you're not going to put that wire in a position where it might get pinched if you tilt the steering column. It's always a good idea to follow an OEM harness and zip tie it to it. And check your routing before running it through the firewall so you don't accidentally make a mistake like I did, routing it the wrong way and have to pull it back out and do it again.
God damn it. What? Ow!
Oh, sorry. That's the one, though.
You found it.
I know, but I didn't run it through the damn dash. I ran it over the top. When finding a place to run your wires through the firewall, look for something that's already got wires running through it that you might be able to expand a little bit and just push it through that same spot. Or possibly there might be a rubber isolator protecting those wires going through the firewall that you can just puncture or cut a small slit in and push them through that way. A lot of times there's also a cover that you might be able to unbolt, then drill a hole in and then put it back. Now, I don't like actually using a drill to try and go through the firewall because it can be a little tricky making sure you don't cut into any wires or anything else while you're doing it. If you do decide that's your only option, put a piece of hose over your drill bit. So as soon as that drill bit punctures through the sheet metal, that hose will stop the drill from getting pulled in and possibly rip out any wiring. I've actually had that happen to me a couple times in the past, and it's not a fun situation. So right here, my wires are ran through the firewall and I'm hooking up the pigtail end to those wires. Before doing this, if you did take this apart, you want to pry out the little tab that you had to bend down to get it out of the pigtail. Sometimes when you remove the wires, it will flatten out that tab and then those won't hold in tight to the pigtail when you slide them back together. By lifting up that little tab, this makes them so they will hold good in that pigtail, and then you can reassemble them in the way you took them apart. So you don't have to worry about those connections coming loose over time with vibration and you end up having a light that doesn't work. Once snapping together the harness coming from your switch inside the cab to your battery harness and then connecting the one from your LED light to the battery harness, that pretty much wraps up your basic install. Now I'm going to get into how I wired that key on power. After I had hooked up the main power and ground to the battery, I actually temporarily hooked up the switch harness outside of the vehicle so I could test the light switch and find out what was power, what was ground. That also allowed me to make sure that the basic install worked by turning on and off the light. And now I'm checking the wiring to see how they wired it, figure out my negative and positive so I could run my key on power so we don't kill the battery by accidentally leaving it on. Now, because this rocker switch itself did have an LED light in it, I knew there had to be a power and a ground running to the switch. So right here, I'm just using my voltmeter and going between the black and the white to see which one they were using for power and which one they were using for ground. So the first way I had it hooked up was the red lead to the black wire and the black lead to the white wire, and I was getting a negative voltage telling me I was reversed. Once switching those leads, so the red was on the white wire and my black lead was on the black wire, I was reading a regular voltage telling me that the black was being used as a ground and the white was being used as the positive in this wiring. So all I needed to do in order to rewire this so there wasn't a possibility of a dead battery is remove those white leads from the switch and replace them with a key on power instead of the constant battery power supply that was put to it. Once verifying that the white wire was the power wire running to the switch, I went ahead and disconnected that switch harness. The easiest way to find a key on power to tap into on your vehicle is look in the owner's manual. Once looking in my owner's manual, I did find that there was a customer use key on power in the fuse panel. And one of the cleanest ways to tap into that fuse is adding one of these add a circuit fuses. They're very reasonably priced on Amazon and are available for almost every type of fuse out there. This allows you to run whatever was running off of that fuse and run a separate fuse for another connection point for whatever you are trying to power. So right here you can see I added that add a circuit to that fuse location 27 under the dash in the cab, and I ran a red wire from that add a circuit up to the switch in the dash. I removed the two white wires that were the aftermarket harness that was the battery supply and butt connected and teed off of that one red wire to connect to where both of those white wires were connected on the switch, giving me a key on power to the switch. Now, because those two white wires did still have positive voltage going to them, I did zip tie them to the other wires right there behind the switch so they didn't possibly bounce around behind the dash and short something out. Okay, so right here you can see I turned the key on. I do have this little blue light telling us we do have power to the switch. Now I'm going to turn the switch on. You can see that the LED light bar came on. I'm going to turn the switch off. Back on. However, when I shut the key off, which is what I'm going to do right now, it does shut the light off, which is exactly what I was looking to do. So let's say your vehicle is not equipped with a customer access key on accessory power to pull off of. I will show you how to test and find your own key on power that you might be able to tap into, some things to watch out for. I'm also going to show you how I would wire in the switch if I had to pull power off the fuse block that's in the engine compartment. The reason I get to show you that is because I was having my daughter help me test for a key on power initially, and we had a little miscommunication, which ended up leading to some extra work that I didn't really need to do, which really ended up sucking for me, but is definitely beneficial for this video. So right here, I'm just touching ground of the dash, and I got my positive lead here. I'm on DC volts. Right here you can see that I've got 12 volts and I've got the key off, so that would be a constant power to that fuse. Right here I am testing the ADA circuit that I put in. I've got nothing on it now. I'm going to turn the key on. And now I'm going to test that same fuse, and you'll see that I have 11.5 volts, telling me that this is a key on fuse. So I'm going to hold that there and shut the key off, and you can see it drops that power, which is exactly what we're looking for. You can go through every fuse in the engine compartment or inside the dash in order to find where your key on power is compared to a constant battery supply to pull off of. You do need to be careful if you are going to try and wire it in this way by checking your fuses for key on power, because I'm not a big fan of pulling off anything that is running another computer, just in case that extra amperage draw messes with that OEM wiring. One of my favorite places to pull power off of on older vehicles is the key on power going to the radio, because worst case, if you overload that circuit, you're just going to lose power to your radio, which is no big deal. There was two reasons I was not worried about overloading that circuit on the fuse panel. The first is it was actually labeled to be used as a consumer key on accessory, so there was probably not anything else vital on that fuse. The other reason is that they incorporated a relay into this circuit for this LED light bar. So with the way it's wired, they're using the switch to excite the relay, which takes almost no amperage whatsoever. And once that relay is activated, it's just transferring those two battery connections that we already made through to power that LED light bar. If you do want a little bit better explanation about how a relay works, I will post an icon at the end of this video you can click on, where I will go into a lot more detail about how to wire in a relay and how a relay works. Now, depending on the vehicle you're putting a light bar on, you might need to pull power off of the power distribution box that's in the engine compartment. That's what we had originally planned. I was having my daughter help me with this, and we had a little miscommunication while we were testing for a key on power, and ended up pulling off of a fuse that had constant power instead of key on. And I didn't realize this until I had already completely wired it in, including cutting the white wire at the harness to run the power from the fuse box inside the cab to power the switch, notched out the lid of the fuse panel box in order for the wire to fit outside of it so I could still close the lid. Needless to say, I was pretty pissed with the end result after realizing that it was a constant instead of a key on, so double check yourself before modifying anything on your vehicle. Once verifying everything was working correctly, I did use some zip ties in order to tie up all the wiring to make it look good. Went ahead and reinstalled the grill by pushing the bottom clips into place and putting the 4 screws and tightening those down. I do like to use a drill when tightening those down so I can set the torque setting, because a lot of times those are going into plastic and you don't want to strip those out. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and it gave you some good information. If so, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. The whole concept of my channel is to give you guys the most information in the least amount of time as possible so I don't waste your time. And I hope to see you next time. Have a good one. Later.